podcast. Sorry, I'm going to start that again. Featured speaker on this topic will be Leslie Rosenblood, who is a host of the Podcast for Inquiry, which is a bi-weekly podcast produced by the Centre for Inquiry Canada, CFIC, and going to talk today to us about putting a number on how much religion costs Canadians. Sorry.
All right. And because I like to talk, but I also want to respect time, when should I aim to finish this presentation?
Well, we're going to take just a few minute break. If we can keep it to 5 minutes and then continue on with the presentation and Q&A. So if we can break sometime around 12:10, I think we're in good shape.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, then, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here, and I hope you'll find this interesting. And I'm going to be talking about the cost of religion in Canada. Now, we talk a lot, at least in social discourse, about the social costs of religion. We compare in-group amity with out-group enmity. We talk about how some people believe prayers are a substitute for action. Thoughts and prayers, anyone? We can think about perpetrating crimes against children, about covering up crimes against children, taking strong stands against things like reproductive rights for women, opposing equal rights for the LGBT community, and much more. I'm not going to talk about any of that today. This morning, I'm going to talk about money, cold, hard cash, and quantify the cost of religion in Canada with specific dollar amounts based on rigorous research conducted by the Centre for Inquiry Canada. So let me start with the headline figure. Just a few policy choices by various levels of government results in direct and indirect subsidies of over $5.5 billion, yes, with a B, billion dollars per year, each and every year. And I'm going to spend the rest of my time telling you how we came up with that number. But first, I need to define my terms. I'll be using the phrase religious charity a lot in the next half hour. And I don't mean, when I say that, any charity associated with a faith. So in order to understand what I do mean, you have to understand what it means to be a charity in Canada. When you register with the Canada Revenue Agency, you must declare what your primary goal is. And it can only be one of four things. It is to achieve the relief of poverty. You must try to achieve the advancement of education. You can pursue other purposes that are beneficial to community, or, and I am not making this up, advancement of religion. So when I say religious charity, I am talking about those organizations that do nothing but advance religion, evangelizing, proselytizing, and so on. These are recognized as charities by Revenue Canada with all of the benefits and privileges that recognition bestows. Again, I am not making this up. But why, you might ask? I'm going to also share with you that I'm psychic, and so I can tell what you're thinking, and I'm going to ask the questions that you have. But the explanation of my psychic abilities is beyond the scope of this presentation, so I will not be taking questions about that. They'll just be part of this presentation. So you're asking, why do we recognize advancement of religion as an inherently charitable act? And all I can really say about that is that institutional inertia is a powerful force to overcome. The criteria that determine which charities qualify, which organizations qualify as charities, was inherited from Britain. In 1891, the British House of Lords ruled on what constitutes a charity in a dispute between the tax authorities and the Moravian Church. They developed a common law test based on the preamble of a 1601 Statute of Charitable Uses, which is more commonly known as the Statute of Elizabeth. And that stated that advancement of religion in and of itself was a charitable activity. So Canada never decided on its own what constitutes a charity. We are actually beholden at the moment to a decision made in another country over a century ago based on the introduction to a law that's over 400 years old. That makes no sense, I hear you say. Yeah, and here we are in complete agreement. But the idea that religious faith is an inherent good is also a widely held belief. I'm part of another organization, not just Toronto Oasis and not just the Centre for Inquiry Canada, but also the Canadian Secular Alliance. And the Canadian Secular Alliance received a letter on July 27th, 2012, from the then finance minister, federal finance minister, Jim Flaherty. And he stated in this letter that, and this is a direct quotation, charitable status for the advancement of religion is based on the presumption that religion provides people with a moral and ethical framework for living and plays an important role in building social capital and social cohesion. I, for one, would challenge that presumption. But wait, I hear you say. Many church groups teach English as a second language for refugees or run a soup kitchen. How do you know which church groups advance religion and which ones do actual good works? That is an excellent question. So, in order to answer it, the Centre for Inquiry Canada filed a Freedom of Information request with the Canada Revenue Agency, and we obtained the 2018 annual filings for all Canadian charities that A, had advancement of religion as their primary goal, and B, declared that 100% of their activities were in pursuit of that aim. In all, there were over 32,000 such charities. So what, I hear you ask? What's so important about being recognized as a charity by Revenue Canada? You're a sharp group. That is another excellent question. So the biggest benefit to being a registered charity is the ability to issue tax receipts. So if you donate $100 to pick a charity at random, to the Centre for Inquiry Canada, which is a national educational charity, and if you haven't, by the way, you probably should, if you donate $100 to the Centre for Inquiry Canada, you'll get a tax receipt for $100. And depending on your income, your taxes will be reduced by somewhere between $20 or $55, depending on your tax bracket. So if you make, say, $30 million per year, you'll get $55 back. If you make $30,000 per year, you'll get about $20 back. It just depends. So in effect, the government is subsidizing a substantial chunk of your donation, and because you get a bunch back at tax time. If you made a similar contribution to a secular nonprofit organization, that'll give you the same warm, fuzzy feeling inside because you know you're doing good work, but your bank account balance won't get the 30% plus fill-up at tax time. So being a registered charity, financially speaking, is a big deal. But I hear you think this, enough history and philosophy. You're practically shouting that at me with your minds. Very well. Here's the first set of numbers. Canadians are a generous bunch. They donated over $18 billion to charities of all stripes in 2018, and almost $7.5 billion of that, or 40% of the total, were to religious charities. Now, we know how much was contributed to charities, but because we don't know specifically the specific tax bracket of each of the donors, we can't say for certain the precise amount of tax credits that donors received in aggregate. However, we used some very conservative assumptions, and we estimate that Canadians enjoyed $3.2 billion in tax relief in 2018 for donations to religious charities. And while in principle, the actual number could be lower, in reality, the true subsidy for evangelism is likely much, much larger. But we're going to use $3.2 billion for today's conversation. And now I hear you thinking, enough ambiguity. All right. I share your passion for precision. So in that spirit, I will be precise. It's not just people who give money to religious charities. So do all three levels of government in Canada. So the federal government in 2018 gave $143.7 million to 2,536 religious charities. Provincial governments directly funded 1,394 religious charities. to the tune of more than $726 million. And municipal governments transferred almost $217 million to 658 religious charities across Canada. So in total, that is over $1 billion, or I'm sorry, for the sake of precision, $1,087,040,355 to religious charities in 2018. I've lost my place here. Okay, so not so fast, you might be thinking. Who's getting those funds? You might want to know. And I agree with you, that is an eminently fair question. So I'm not going to enumerate all 2,536 charities. I just don't have that time. We won't just be here all day, we'd be here all year. But I will talk about the largest federal grant in 2018 to a particular charity was over $20 million. Precision, I hear you say very well. It was $20,198,383. And this went to the Kelowna Christian Center Society. Now, this is a recurring and growing subsidy. It started in 2013 with $13.7 million. And in 2019, the year after that I'm talking about, it grew from over 20 million to over 22 million in 2019. So who are, you're asking, the Kelowna Christian Center Society? Again, perfectly reasonable question. What do they do, you want to know? I'm going to tell you. They offer programs such as weekly church services, Christian education from kindergarten to 12, both on campus and online. They have a Christian preschool, Christian outreach, local, provincial, national, and international pastoral care programs for the development of families from children through senior adults, and Christian daycare. Their tagline of the Kelowna Christian Center's tagline, sorry, got tripped over my tongue. The Kelowna Christian Center's tagline is, "Where people belong and Jesus matters." Their vision is to raise up and influence the world around us by creating a space to know God, find freedom, discover purpose, and make a difference through Bible-based and Jesus-centered living. So, personally, I don't mind that this organization exists, but I question whether that's worth a $20 million direct subsidy. That's money coming from the federal government directly to this organization. But the federal government subsidy is dwarfed by what Ontario and Saskatchewan give to Christian Horizons. How much does Christian Horizons receive, you ask? Well, I will tell you, no secrets here. It is a staggering $163.4 million in 2018 alone. Who are they? Who is Christian Horizons? Well, I don't want you to accuse me of summarizing or paraphrasing or misrepresenting who they are. So I'm going to quote them directly. Christian Horizons is, and I quote, "a Christian organization to support families who experience developmental disabilities with an ongoing commitment to innovative, faith-based service options." Here is their mission. Again, these are all direct quotations. "As an expression of Christian faith, we work together with people who experience disabilities to accomplish their goals and nurture communities where everybody belongs." Their vision: people who experience disabilities belong to communities in which their God-given gifts are valued and respected. Their values: Christian Horizons' values arise from our belief that every person is loved by God and created in his image. Because of this, we strive to honor God and value people in all we do and with all of our resources. So I'm just providing the facts here. I definitely have opinions, but I'm going to leave it to you to decide whether these organizations should receive direct transfers from our governments. Now, hold on, you're saying. Not so fast, Mr. Rosenblood. Are you double counting here, mixing in indirect government subsidies via donations with direct transfer of funds, to which I can only respond, no, I am not. This $1 billion is entirely distinct from the $3.2 billion that donors to religious charities receive via tax credits. Everything that I'm talking to you are different buckets of funds. So I'm getting another message from you. I can do basic arithmetic, Leslie. $3.2 billion plus another $1 billion or so is only $4.2 billion. And you told us, Leslie, at the top, that it was more than $5.5 billion. Well, where's the missing money? Am I just exaggerating for effect? Nope. No, I am an honest person, ladies and gentlemen. There are 3 more ways in which religious charities receive special treatment from the government of Canada. The first up is charities receive a credit for some part of the HST or the GST that they pay, depending on which province or territory they're in. Now, for reasons that make sense only to a particular kind of government bureaucrat, this is called a public service body rebate, and it's paid directly to the charity. So if you're a charity, if you're a nonprofit organization and you buy things, any things, you pay HST or GST on it. If, however, you are a charity and you buy things and you pay HST or GST on it, you get a big part of that back, about half. The calculation is a bit more complicated than that, but you get basically half of that back. So that benefit that accrues to charities is another $318 million from government coffers into the bank accounts of religious charities. And again, I remind you, when I say religious charities, I'm talking about those that do nothing but advance religion. If anyone that runs a soup kitchen in the basement of a church is also a charity, it's run by a religious organization, not what I'm talking about here. But wait, there's more. We're not done here, and these last 2 are special carve-outs just for religion. This isn't about being a charity, but this is about special tax privileges given to religious organizations. Let's say you're a professor, and you're going to teach for a year or 2 at some school in a different city. In all likelihood, the university or college is going to provide you with a nice home for you and your family, should you have one. And now this is called a housing allowance. You get a little bit of extra cash, or you get a house to live in while you're living there. And that is a taxable benefit. So whatever the cost of that house is included in your salary and your compensation, and you pay tax on that. But let's say you're a priest or a preacher or other member of the ecclesiastical community, and you're sent to a new church or temple or mosque or whatever. And you're going to be at this new house of worship for a year or 2, again, with housing provided for you. That housing benefit is tax-free. So that might not sound like much, but again, it amounts to $100 million in an annual subsidy to religious organizations. Is not available to any other aspect of society. And that particular figure, I need to point out, did not come from the research done by the Centre for Inquiry Canada, but that was done by some excellent original research done by our friends at the British Columbia Humanist Association. And that brings me to the last exemption. Houses of worship are exempt from paying property taxes in all 10 provinces and all 3 territories. And before I give you the number that I have a confession and an apology to make for you. I cannot be as precise as I would like with this figure. This is a fairly complex calculation, and I know you like exact numbers, but we had to do a little bit of extrapolation. Some of the challenges is getting on data is that every municipality has its own tax rate, and another complication is that the tax rate on or the municipal taxes is based on the estimated current market value of the land on which a house of worship rests. But what is reported is only the purchase price. So if a church bought the land 100 years ago, that whatever they paid 100 years ago is what's reported, but the taxes would be based on whatever the current value of that land is. And you might have noticed that real estate prices have gone up in Canada rather substantially over the last 30 years, to say nothing of the last 100. But we're not working entirely in the dark here. Even though no one is directly, even though no one is directly tracking the amount of revenue lost as a result of exempting houses of worship from municipal taxes, there was a study conducted by the government of New Brunswick, and it calculated that municipal revenues in the province were lessened by $18.2 million on the land and buildings. And the purchase value of those land and buildings was $545 million. Now, that gives us an implicit rate of 3.3% of lost revenue. When we extrapolate that across Canada, by summing the declared purchase prices of houses of worship everywhere in the country, we determined that municipalities lose out on over $880 million every year from the property tax exemption granted to houses of worship. Now, that's probably a considerable understatement, but because we can't quantify how much, we're just going to go with, again, a very conservative number. So let me sum up, like quite literally, let me sum up the numbers that I've just given to you. The ability for proselytized organizations to issue charitable tax receipts, $3.2 billion. Public service body rebates, $318 million. Federal government transfers, $140 million. Provincial government transfers, $750 million. Municipal government transfers, $217 million. The property tax exemption, $881 million. And the clergy residence exemption, $100 million. Add all of that up, and you get over $5.6 billion, which, if you recall, is precisely the number I gave you at the beginning of this presentation. So, in conclusion, by being treated as religious charities, religious organizations do not have to pay tax on other things as well. But these are things that we couldn't quantify. So $5.6 billion is what I can tell you about. But there's more. There is so much more that is not included in that $5.6 billion. So there's property tax income. Rent. You're supposed to pay tax on property income, but because we don't have the numbers from what we are able to get from the government, from the Canada Revenue Agency, we didn't include that. Charities are also exempted from capital gains taxes. And again, since charities don't have to declare that on the forms they submit to the Canada Revenue Agency every year, we didn't include that in our figures. They're probably substantial because religious charities in 2018 had over $47 billion in assets. So if they invested just a tiny fraction of that in any and reaped benefits from selling stocks or whatever at a higher price, no tax on that. We can't quantify it. We didn't include it. Just for comparison, a secular nonprofit organization would have to pay tax. On both. And there's kind of an elephant in the room. The single largest subsidy to religious organizations in Canada, I haven't even mentioned and is not part of this. And that is the fact that several provinces continue to fund a separate or Catholic school system in the provinces. In Ontario alone, that amounts to a religious education subsidy in the neighborhood of $10 billion each and every year. So what we're talking about here, we want very much for Canada to be a secular nation. There is compelling research to show that the more secular a nation is, the better it thrives. Humans thrive when government neither supports nor suppresses religious expression. It allows for the greatest freedom of all, and as a benefit, people are healthier, wealthier, and freer. So thank you for listening and for learning about the very tangible, quantified, and proven costs of religion in Canada. And if you've got any questions about my research, but not about my psychic abilities, I'd be very happy to address them now.
Unmute myself. Thank you very much. I think this might actually be an excellent point to take a 5-minute break, where we can all develop our questions in our minds and come back to you with them.
I'll turn off my psychic ability so that people have to actually ask them this time.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you, because I think it's good to get this recorded because it's good conversation. So welcome back, everyone. The recording has been resumed, and we're now available for Q&A. Before we begin the discussion, we'd like to just lay down a couple of guidelines. Be brief and on topic, and state first if you're asking a question or making a comment. And you can use the same raise hand function as used prior for the Q&A and conversation, if you'd like to contribute to the discussion. And if you have a lot to share, please be mindful of your time and save some of your contributions until after other participants have had a chance to contribute, and you can so that everyone can share more of their thoughts. At 12:30, we'll take a quick pause just for some upcoming announcements, and then continue with Q&A until 1 p.m. So I hope everybody can stay till 1. With that, I'd like to thank Leslie for the information and the sharing that we've of the information we've all received today. And I think with that, I would say closing remarks, and we can start with Q&A. And I know one conversation was interrupted, and I do apologize for that, but I think if we move along to Helen, and then Tanya and Catherine and Galen, and we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim, and thank you, Leslie. Something that really attracted my attention, the discussion of services for people with disabilities, and I've just been writing a draft chapter on disability, radical disability theory, and sport, which is my field. And certainly it seems that disabled people get the services if they conform, like they get the dose of religion and then they get the services. It seems sort of like the missions in downtown Toronto. I used to work in the daycare center in my United Church going days, and the people who wanted the free lunch had to enter the building early and listen to the sermon before they got their free lunch. Another sinister trend, I think, in Australia is that the government is kind of outsourcing various services, like for women, victims of domestic violence. These services are getting farmed out to religious groups, so they're no longer completely in the hands of secular groups. And again, you get the service as a woman fleeing from an abusive relationship, or a man for that matter. You get the service if you put up with the religion. And I think that's quite a sinister move. Thanks.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Helen. And I'll just make one brief comment, is that unfortunately, we're not immune to that in Canada either. I'll give a single example. In Sudbury, there's a very large prison. And if you happen to be on suicide watch in the Sudbury prison, there is only one book available to you while you're on suicide watch, and that is the Bible. So, unfortunately, it's not, we've got a lot of work to do to promote the value of secularism and church-state independence right where we are. Canada is a pretty good nation as far as secularism goes, but it could be much better.
So much
All right,
better.
next is Tanya.
Thank you. So first, I just have a quick comment and question. So my comment is, I'm so glad that CFI, like there's some secular organization doing all of this research and coming up with the numbers. Like we just, yeah, so yay to that. Like we kind of need a secular think tank group. And I think that's kind of this, the role that the role that you have presented today, which is great, yay. My other question is, like, is it possible, do you think, or how would you react, Leslie, if someone said, well, why don't we take a lift all boats kind of approach? So rather than saying the government shouldn't be subsidizing religious organizations, well, what if we said, well, maybe you should, because it's hard to take away something from people that they once have, like once you give it to them. Like that's why it's so hard to, stop funding Catholics, boards. Like what if we said, well, let's make it easier for some secular groups to get these same benefits? Like, do you think that could be the solution?
So there's a few responses to that. Yes, you could, in principle, say everyone gets charitable status. Fine, but then but if everyone gets charitable status, then it's like almost like no one does. Like the charity should be, well, I would hope to be a fairly narrow segment that actually is directly tied to doing good in the community. And in terms of the lifting all boats, I'm going to go do a little bit of a history lesson here. Remember John Tory? And I'm not talking about John Tory, former mayor of Toronto. I'm talking about John Tory, same person, different role, former leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario. There was a provincial election called, and it was the third day of the campaign. If you looked at the polls, it was kind of neck and neck between McGuinty and Tory, between the Liberals and the PC party. It was anyone's election. And then John Tory made a statement. And I agreed entirely with the premises of the statement. He said, Ontario's education system, the way it's funded, is blatantly discriminatory. And he correctly observed that we have been condemned by the United Nations for our blatantly discriminatory education system in Ontario. And he says, this cannot continue. I agreed with everything he said up to that point. And then he said, therefore, as Premier, I will fund every religious denomination to have their own sectarian schools across the province where numbers warrant. And I have never seen in my life an act of such complete and total self-immolation in a political sense. He basically cut his own head off and handed it to McGuinty on a silver platter. And the Liberals went on to win a stonking majority as a result of that one statement. He lost the campaign on the third day. So I would say both philosophically, Tanya, it's not such a great idea. And also politically, Ontarians have made it very clear that we don't want more religious funding in the province. We want less. So it's also politically popular to reduce the religious influence in Canada. It is a challenge. It will take political will, but it can be done, and it is what people want. So I'm encouraging people to actually take action. And the first step on that is understanding the magnitude of the subsidies that religious organizations get today. Catherine.
Okay, so in your numbers, you talked about people whose sole object or 100% object in their applications was religious, but then also talked about how it's harder for other organizations who are not religious to get charitable status. I mean, a great example is Oasis, which should have charitable status, but does not for whatever reasons. So my question is, are you able to break down how many organizations put down 100% religious because it's easier to get charitable status than saying it's education or some other means? But in fact, what they actually do involves large components of education or activities that would otherwise already qualify for religious status.
All right. So, Catherine, I thought I had made it very clear that I was not going to use my psychic abilities in the Q&A session. But to answer your question, we did not employ those abilities of mine during the research phase. So we had to trust that when each charity submitted its annual review, its 2018 annual form to the Canada Revenue Agency, that they were accurate. I think you are correct. There are charities that that declared that their activities were advancing religion when they did engage in things like alleviation of poverty and advancement of education. But there are simply too many charities, and that would involve some subjective evaluation. And as fair as we might want to be, both the amount of work required and then the accusations that whenever we exercise a subjective judgment that we got it wrong, we wanted to insulate ourselves from that form of criticism. So we simply made the blanket assumption that people were accurate, or charities were accurate when submitting their annual forms. I think that given that many charities are fairly small with a volunteer staff, they did go for the expedient route rather than the absolutely correct route. I think that many charities would understate perhaps how many of their resources they devoted towards advancing religion. So if they they might exaggerate, for example, the quantity of resources they put into alleviation of poverty in comparison to proselytization. But in our research, we make no judgments of that. We simply made an assumption that whatever numbers they submitted to the Canada Revenue Agency were accurate. We weren't going to second guess them. So I think what you are describing is a real phenomenon. I think it goes in both directions, but I have no means of determining the scale of that and what impact that might have on the numbers. What I can tell you is that the numbers that I presented are correct based on the assumption that, or they are as correct and as accurate as the filings of each charity to the Canada Revenue Agency.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Galen.
Yeah, if only there was a federation maybe that would be looking into how taxpayers' money is spent. Oh yeah, I did find something online, and they seem to be interested in the carbon tax and defunding the CBC, but nothing about the cost of religion in Canada. And I'm just wondering, why doesn't this Canadian Taxpayer Federation, a nice, legitimate organization, why doesn't it look into the cost of religion in Canada? I'm shocked that they don't do it already. Shocked.
Again, Galen, I'm going to say the same thing to you that I said to Catherine. I am not going to employ my psychic abilities to answer questions in this session. What I will say, however, is that not every organization can be as open and fair-minded as the Toronto Oasis and the Centre for Inquiry Canada. They have an agenda, they have a base, and they play to it. And if you don't think that the Canada, if you are shocked and appalled that the Canada Taxpayer Federation is not living up to its high-minded standards and its stated goals, then I can only suggest that you donate your time and energy to organizations such as Toronto Oasis and CFIC, because we are who we say we are, and we do what we say we're going to do. And we take, at least here at CFIC, we take the spirit of inquiry seriously. We don't start with a conclusion and then do everything we can to bolster it. We start with open inquiry and let the facts guide the direction that we head in. But thank you, Galen. John, your turn.
I just wanted to ask you, Leslie, how big is the Center for Inquiry? Like, how many members do you have, and what do you do? Like, what is the fight? What are the actions?
Okay, well, so I don't have the total number. We've got several hundred members. So I don't know the exact number. It's in the several hundreds. I believe it's somewhat under 1,000. So that's in terms of those are the numbers in terms of members. In terms of what we do, well, our goals are to promote reason, compassion, and secular values in Canada. In terms of specific things that we do, we've got in-person events, so we build community. We're going to have a stonking, wonderful event. I mentioned this to you in the breakout room in August. For those of you based in Toronto, Seth Andrews will be coming to the Transact Club on August 11th. Tickets will go on sale in next week or two, so look that up. That's going to be a lot of fun. Tomorrow, we're going to be submitting a petition to a petition that we've already submitted will be tabled at the Ontario legislature. This petition has thousands of signatures from across the province, and it's calling for the defunding of the separate school system. And then the legislature has 28 sitting days to respond, so we'll be reporting on that. We've built a library of critical thinking tools. We do have Podcast for Inquiry, which we hope exemplifies the spirit of inquiry and how to form arguments and opinions based on knowledge and reason. And on top of that, we are volunteer-led. So a lot of our initiatives are based on the passion of what a member wants to do, and then we provide the resources. Oh, and of course, we do original research like the Cost of Religion series, which I've put in the chat. So you can look at, I think, the 5 reports of multiple pages each, which really delves into the details of how we develop those numbers, and you can see what the analysis is. And we were both quite rigorous, and where there were ambiguities, we were quite conservative. So $5.6 billion is almost certainly an understatement, but we can be very confident in that, and that's what we're doing. So it's so all of those things. It's what we're striving to do, because I can tell you that there are religious faith-based organizations out there whose mission is to drive, to embed faith into public policy at every level. And the way I think of, there's this organization called the Cardis Institute. So you might remember that there was fairly briefly the Office of Religious Freedom in Canada. And the person who led that office while it existed is a member and like a director of the Cardis Institute. And I've met them, and they're kind of the nemesis of organizations like ours. But when you meet these people, they are nice. Like it's if you actually interact directly with them, it's impossible not to like them. They are articulate, they are charming, they are generous, they are kind, and they are doing everything they can to embed faith at every level of Canadian society. So while I object to everything that they are attempting to do, there's 2 more things you need to know about them. They are incredibly well connected politically. They have a deep relationship with the key decision makers in government at every level, and they are incredibly well funded. Everything that I do here at the Centre for Inquiry Canada is strictly on a volunteer basis. They are full-time employees. This is their career. They have lots of money. They have lots of connections. So if we are going to triumph in winning the hearts and minds of Canadians, there's a lot of work to be done. And it's going to take the efforts of people like us to continue to make people aware of these issues and to affect change.
Thank you for answering my question, Leslie. I think Kim's going to interject here for a moment to do our announcements as a.
Oh, okay. Well, can we do 2? There's 2 more hands up. Can we do those 2?
We can do that after.
I promise. Oh, we'll do those afterwards. Okay,
we'll do it after the announcements. Yeah.
All right, fine.
Just a quick few announcements about upcoming events, and then we'll move right back into Q&A.
Okay.
I'll just share my screen. This will be a quick one. If I am sharing, oops, share.
in that seating inside. Kim, not at all.
Oh,
If we could just take a moment to applaud Leslie for his presentation.
absolutely.
Thanks very much, Leslie, and I'll turn it right back over to you to
Thank you all very much. It's been a
Ryan.
pleasure, and I'm happy to keep the conversation going and to keep
Yeah,
talking.
I personally had no idea I mean, I knew tax deductible charities must cost a lot of money, but I had no idea the scope and breadth of and depth of the amount of funding.
Yeah, and just think, I mean, just think if secular organizations got even distributed got $1 billion or $2 or $5 every year, the difference it would make in the resources available to us and what we could do with that.
I
But
volunteer at a food bank and at a very secular organization in Scarborough, and I mean, the need is strong, and there's so much more that money could be doing than, well,
indeed.
what it's doing. So
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so moving on to Q&A, Ryan, you're up, sir.
Oh, thank you so much, Leslie, and yeah, thank you for giving the presentation. Very insightful. So my first question is just so you know what, I'll just start with the main question I have, which is, so I was just looking at the federal budget expenses and revenues for 2023. It's something like $457 billion for 2023. Now, I would think, there might be people, let's say if you're listening to your presentation, who might think, okay, well, let's say if religion costs Canadians, let's say, 5.6 billion, let's say 10 billion as like a less conservative estimate, as more, let's say, realistic estimate.
Sure.
Let's say, it costs Canadians $10 billion and the federal budget is $457 billion. And let's say if you're a decision maker, you might if you're, or even a naysayer, you might be thinking, well, why should I waste all this political time and energy in fixing or correcting that $10 billion or $5.6 billion issue when it's like a drop in the bucket compared to the total federal revenue? Like, what would you say to them regarding that if they were to say that to you? Again, I don't really agree with that opinion, but I was just wondering how you would respond.
So I would say that the federal government is of a size and sophistication that it can walk and chew gum at the same time. It's not just doing one thing or another.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to, there's a finite number of things that it can do, but the number of things that it can do is certainly more than one. And I would say, name something else that's as simple as, let's eliminate advancement of religion as a charitable purpose. That's pretty straightforward, actually. And just that alone gets you $4 billion. Let's eliminate the clergy housing allowance exemption. That is simply a matter of the tax code. CRA makes those changes all the time. And boom, that's $100 million that you get. Like, the rate of return on this versus effort expended is great. And sure, it might be small compared to what we spend on, say, the Army. And there are certainly other aspects of our tax code that are unfair. And I would not argue that we need to do this and only this. And if we actually do only this, all of Canada's ills will be resolved. But I will say that if we take a few fairly straightforward measures and we get, by your numbers, an extra $10 billion per year that we can devote to whatever we want, whether it's a universal basic income, whether it's to simply deficit reduction and debt reduction, whether it's to advance education, alleviate poverty. There's any number of things that a government can do with $10 billion. And I would say that it's probably worth the expenditure of some effort to achieve that, especially since, as research shows, these are not funds that generate positive returns to society.
Okay.
So the cost of taking $10 billion away from these organizations is not going to come to the detriment of Canadians at large.
Okay,
All
we're gonna skip ahead to Michelle because she hasn't had a chance to speak or ask a question yet, and then we'll come
Okay.
back. We'll come
Michelle,
back to
you're
Pat.
up.
Okay, thanks. Hi. Leslie, I have a question around like fundraising and schmoozing and stuff like that, right? Like getting in. And I've done advocacy work in the past around unsealing adoption records for adoptees and moms, information around their children. So, and it's a lot of work, and it's getting your hands dirty, and it's fight, right? It's not just signing petitions and stuff. It's like, it's hard work. So, but we had to raise money, right, for different areas of advocacy. We would have a fundraiser, Anyway, I'm just wondering, I would be happy to join in. My strength, like pull in people and their strengths. So my strength would be in organizing events with the team to raise money. Like, is there anything like that going on with any organization? I think we sorely lack in that area as a community. Yeah.
Absolutely. So okay, so I can only speak for from what I know. So the Center for Inquiry Canada, unfortunately, from the we were going to have a national tour. Yasmin Mohammed published a book in late 2019 called Unveiled, where she talked about her upbringing in an Islamic environment. She was forcibly married to a member of ISIS, and she describes the process of becoming unveiled. And CFIC was organizing a national tour that was going to take place in early 2020. And just like 2 weeks before the first stop, we had to cancel the entire tour, and at that rate, that caused significant losses. But we were planning on making, it would be a combination book tour and fundraising event. It has been largely dormant for the last 4 years, but we're starting up again. So I think I alluded to it earlier. We're bringing Seth Andrews. He's the host of a very popular podcast called The Thinking Atheist. We're bringing him to Toronto, and he's going to be talking about who's the better designer, God or Seth Andrews. And that'll be happening in August. And we're hoping for two things as a result of that event. One is we're going to raise a little bit of money, not a lot, but at least some. But secondly, we want to reinvigorate the in-person CFIC community. And honestly, it's the humanist community. I don't care whether it's Toronto Oasis, Humanist Association of Ontario, Ontario Humanist Society, Humanist Canada, Center for Inquiry Canada, Canadian Secular Alliance. Like someone mentioned earlier, Tanya mentioned earlier about raising all boats. Well, when it comes to the humanist community, it's about raising all boats. What matters is that these ideas, that these thoughts, that this philosophy becomes more widespread, commonly accepted. I want people to use reason, compassion, and secular values in making decisions and in guiding evidence-based public policy. So we want to get back to that. And if you are willing, Michelle, to contribute your time, expertise, and energy to making that happen, please contact me. Just look at my surname, Rosenblood, at centerforinquiry.ca.
I have your email.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Contact me, and we can make it happen. Like, we are a volunteer-run organization, and we depend on the passion of our volunteers to make things happen. But it is something very much that we want to do, and we want to get back to now that the populace at large is largely vaccinated, and people are comfortable more or less in coming back to in-person events.
And think about everybody think about their connections in government and NGOs.
Yeah. So
anyway.
And that is actually something that we have been lacking, is that personal connection to people in government. And that's something that I'm going to be suggesting to the CFIC board that we resume, that the people that are located in Toronto consciously develop relationships with both the elected officials, which turn over every 4 years or every few elections, but also with the with the ministerial staff, with the bureaucrats, if we can establish CFIC or Toronto Oasis as a trusted, reliable, accurate, fair-minded third party, develop those personal relationships here in Toronto. I'm going to suggest that the folks that we have living in Ottawa do the same for federal members of parliament. I've really underestimated the value of those connections in the past, and I'm going to suggest to CFIC that we correct that down the road.
Good. Let's have a brainstorming session around it.
I would love that. I would love that. Thank you, Michelle.
Great. It's great to see this activism sort of taking seed. We're gonna skip ahead to Tanya Long and then Catherine. Sorry, Catherine, just because Tanya Long hasn't contributed yet. But Tanya,
yeah, I just want to say, first of all, Leslie, that was an incredible talk, and I thank you for doing that. And like Kim said, I mean, I knew, but the number is just staggering, and the various kinds of tax breaks that the religious organizations get is just incredible. But as far as thinking, I was thinking about, you know, why isn't there more complaint? Why doesn't this tax group look at, even though a growing number of people identify as non-religious or unsure, I think that the religious contingent is still strong enough that I bet you that any politician would be afraid of losing votes if they took this on. So would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, on any issue, there are going to be people on two sides of that. So if you look at the Canadian census, every 10 years they measure, they measure religious adherence in Canada. And every year the level of nones, broadly defined, atheist, agnostic, not non-believers, no particular tradition, goes up and up and up. But, and this is another one of our projects that we're working on, the Canadian census question on religion is very misleading because it asks, and I'm sorry, I don't have the precise wording memorized, but it asks, what is your religious faith? Please respond, even if you are no longer a practicing member. So for me personally, if I were to answer that question as it is asked, I would say that I am Jewish. Why? Because I was born and raised into a nominally Jewish family. And it actually asks like how you were raised, even if you are no longer a practicing member. That's not what I do in the census if I'm asked that on the long form, but it does mean that religious adherence is considerably, although I can't quantify how much, overstated in the Canadian census. So even though it's growing significantly every time it's asked the question, the numbers that are given are a lot less. So to answer your question specifically, yes, there are going to be everyone who gets those $5.5 billion is going to say, hey, don't do that to me. But the number of people who I think the largest constituency is people who just don't care because not every issue matters to everyone. But there is a large and ever-growing constituency of people like the people that are on this that are in this meeting who say, no, that's not fair. This is not just. You have a right to exist. Your church, your mosque, your temple, your synagogue. I don't want to take that away, but I don't want to fund it either. That's not fair. And so I think there are an ever increasing number of people who would support that. Yes, Tanya, there will be those who shout from the rooftops on how terrible it is, but that's what political will is deciding which hill are you going to, on which hill are you going to make your stand, but also saying, you know what, on balance, I'm not going to lose all that many votes because I'm going to gain votes because an ever increasing number of people do not belong, do not identify with any religious tradition. And that's why I think our efforts, we need to pursue our efforts on both the institutional level, the political level, changing the laws and regulations and through the courts and so on, as well as at the retail level, and like making sure and convincing people day to day with everyone that you meet, so that the Canadian populace at large starts accepting by default reason, compassion, secular values.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
And
Leslie.
Lola, thank you. Someone was able to put the exact wording of the census question into the chat. I can't answer a question and type at the same time. So thank you very much, Lola and Tanya.
Lola is such a valuable contributor to this group on the regular. We're going to move along to Catherine at last. Sorry for putting you off.
That's okay, but now I'm going to say something totally different from what I was going to say. Okay, so I have to file a Law Society member form every year by March 31st. So I just did mine, and one of the questions is religious affiliation, and I was so pissed off because they had all kinds of different religions, blah blah blah, and they said tick all that apply. And one of the options was atheist, and another option was no religion. So I dutifully ticked off both, and it wouldn't allow me. And I thought, damn, you can't tick off Jewish and no religion. You can't tick off atheist and no religion, because they seem to treat atheists. Now, I think it's just stupidity, and I wondered who I could complain to, and of course I didn't complain to anyone. But it's the same kind of thing that people just don't get it. They think that
should
if
complain.
you're an atheist, that you're religious. It's like,
Catherine, that's wrong, and you should complain. Like the only way things are going to change is if people like us take action to
you
make
know,
the
you're
change.
right. I should complain. I just didn't know who to complain to.
Well,
but I guess I could write to the benchers or something. Anyway, that wasn't what I was going to say, but it fit
okay.
in what you said. So there we go.
The takeaway message is be a squeaky wheel. Squeaky wheels get the grease. Right?
Yeah, well, if you don't, then people don't know that there's a problem, right? Or if people know that there's a problem, they feel safe in ignoring it. So it makes sense to let people know that something is wrong.
Okay, we're going to skip ahead again to Elka, who hasn't had a chance to speak, and then we'll go to Tanya and Michelle and Ryan.
Yeah, just suggestion to Catherine that perhaps a good way to go in terms of a complaint is through the CCLA, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, because they may pick this up and be willing to carry this, because this is strictly a legal thing.
Thank you, Elka. Tanya.
Okay, so I'm just going to voice maybe a slightly different perspective. Like, I'm getting soft in my atheism as like I'm 20 years into it, just because more and more I realize, like, the role that religion plays in people's lives, and I worry that taking away, are we trying to take away or attacking something like religion that a lot of people rely on for identity, for spiritual whatever, comfort? Are we trying to take something away without making sure that there's something adequate to replace it? Like, as a person like who's been in secular community building, I just know that we are just so nascent. Like, we do not have the infrastructure to replace the role that religion plays. And maybe, like, it's good to have these numbers, Leslie. I don't want to undermine anything that you've said, but I just feel like, yes, it's good to know the numbers and just keep that in mind. But like, we got to play the long game, and we just have so much work to do before we can replace the enormous role religion plays, not just like spiritually for people, but also identity wise. Like it's just a point of contact. Like, for example, if Justin Trudeau wants to talk to the Muslim community, he goes to a mosque. Like, that's how we interact with each other, with the various communities and so on. So I would just, I don't know, I've just become softer in my atheism as I'm getting older. But yeah, so I just wanted to voice that. I'm not sure if you want to rebut it, but yeah, I just want to.
Well, I'll just say, okay, so I'll just say that I'm a humanist. I mean, I am an atheist, but I honestly, I find the atheism question kind of boring. I think it's been established, and there hasn't been a new argument either in favor or against the existence of a deity in thousands of years. So I'm not going to come up with any new arguments, and honestly, neither are you. So that debate is, I I don't find it interesting anymore. I'm willing to have it if someone engages me one-on-one, but I'm never going to introduce it. But to your substantive point, I am not looking to shut down the mosques, the temples, the churches, the synagogues of Canada. That's not what I'm advocating here. But I am a passionate proponent of secularism, by which I mean government should be neutral in matters of religion. It should neither support nor suppress religious expression. And 5.5 billion, 5.6, excuse me, $5.6 billion of direct and indirect support of religious organizations that are just proselytizing is a violation of secular principles. And as a result of that, that's why I think this is relevant. This isn't about saying that religious people are inherently evil or that we need to convert everyone to the cult of atheism, or that doesn't interest me, and that's not what I'm after here. But I don't want government funding religion preferentially. I think that religious organizations have every right to exist. I support their right to exist. I support freedom of religion, and I support with equal fervor freedom from religion. And I don't want government suppressing religious expression, and I don't want government supporting religious expression. And so my purpose here today is not an attack on the faithful, but is in response to a gross violation of secular principles.
And one might also argue, if I can just quickly interject my own opinion, that society is not going to collapse if religious organizations are not funded by the government. Like, communities are established because people want to assemble. So there's an argument for that nothing's being destroyed or attacked. It's just a matter of putting everything on a fair playing field. That being said, we're going to skip ahead again to Paul, who hasn't had a chance to speak yet, and then we'll go with Ryan and Elka. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Leslie just said. I mean, nothing Leslie has said today, or anybody at Oasis today has said, is in any way anti-religious. It's pro-secular, not anti-religious. And I would actually hope that there would maybe any number of religious people who would agree with us that our governments should not be subsidizing their religious activity when they have other priorities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And we'll go to Ryan.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I also I concur with what's just been said. Like, I don't think that the advancement of religion, like in and of itself, is a good. I mean, I don't think it should even be a category for charities at all. Like, I think we should just get rid of it. Like, charities inherently, I think they should be helping people. Like, that's the only criteria that you should be looking at, helping or educating, I guess, which is a form of helping people, right? So I think sorry, I was just glancing over the CFI report, and what's interesting is that, like, so I think the CFI report just looked at charities which were which had ticked off, I guess, the advancement of religion category, right? But again, those 4 categories regarding charities are not mutually exclusive. So even if we get rid of that one category, they can still, a lot of these organizations can still maintain their charitable status under one of the other heads.
So if you want to get into like practicalities of implementation, we would remove advancement of religion as a charitable purpose, but we would create some expedited way where you could just transfer that. So, for example, the YMCA of Toronto is formally registered under the CRA as under advancement of religion. Now, in my opinion, the YMCA of Toronto deserves charitable status. It's a community center. It does all sorts of great things. But it was incorporated way back when as the Young Men's Christian Association. It doesn't do that anymore, but it just never updated its filings. So I'm not looking to necessarily get rid of every organization that has filed its initial paperwork and never updated it under that head. And so we would make a streamlined thing. So if you initially did that and you run a soup kitchen or you do any actual charitable good, fine. Just reincorporate or reallocate under another charitable head, and you're good to go with minimal of disruption. What I'm targeting is those organizations that get charitable status for replacing the roof of their house of worship or sending missionaries to another country to convert people to your particular sect. Like, fine, you have every right to do that, but that should not get the implicit subsidies that come with charitable status.
Wow, Leslie, you just blew me away with the reveal of what the C in the YMCA stood for. I had no idea. I always assumed that the word Canada or Canadian was worked into that, but I did not know. And I've made Elka laugh. It's your turn, Elka.
Yeah, I knew about that because we ended up in Montreal with the YMHA, you know, the Hebrew Association, because that was the Christian one. So I knew about that. Yeah. I almost wasn't going to speak because what I want to say is so complex. It really takes like 3 hours, but I'm just going to go over the top. These are sort of my conclusions, and maybe another time go into the other stuff. But I really understand what Tanya was saying about replacing religion and giving something to replace it. Because I think it's really should be the other way around. How did we develop a society that's so dependent on this crutch that it hasn't got the skills in which to face the realities of the world? That's the other problem. So the question then becomes, why does a government do this? Why does a society do this? And then you have to go into capitalism and all that other crap that goes with it. And I saw something, I was in Russia before Perestroika, and I was in Russia again after Perestroika. And this was very, very instructive. Before Perestroika, the government had taken all the religious buildings. Some of them that have become museums, others became offices or whatever, but they were all used. After Perestroika, there was a bit, well, I was aware even, you know, during the interval of a lot of battling between the Russian Orthodox Church and the government over all these buildings and all these things. And they ended up with this cooperation that they have in terms of who gets what share of the income and and how do we control these people, because that's what they're doing. It's a cooperative endeavor to control the people. For the government, it's very easy to have things set up in a way that people that where religion exploits the fears of people to get them to behave in a certain manner, and in return for which the governments make sure that there are certain legal benefits and financial benefits that accrue to the religion. So we've got to look at these as an integrated thing. But I do share Tanya's concerns, and it has been my concern as well, because I see people, they have no skills, they have no social skills. Everything is a trigger, everything is afraid, everything, I can't do anything, you know. Yeah, so I do agree with you.
Thank you, Elka. We have one more question that was sent to me in the chat, Leslie. Gary is curious to know if Hamas and Scientologists get charitable tax status in Canada.
Okay, so the answer to both is no. Hamas is Canada considers Hamas to be a terrorist organization. So terrorist organizations do not get charitable tax status. And Scientology spent years, decades actually, attempting to be recognized as an official religion in Canada, and ultimately they were denied. So you actually do have to be recognized as a religion formally by the Canadian government in order to get advancement of religion as a charitable tax status. And despite a long lobbying attempt, Scientology failed. Scientology is recognized religion in the United States of America, and they get a whole bunch of benefits that come with that recognition in the States, but not in Canada.
And I guess that answers the question of whether the flying spaghetti monster is any.
Okay, so that actually raises another interesting quirk. So in order to be recognized as a religion in Canada, it needs to, this again is the Canada Revenue Agency speaking, I'm paraphrasing them here, you need to have an aspect of theistic worship. So the Atheist Church of Canada, I'm sure they were just trolling, but the Atheist Church of Canada wanted to be officially recognized as religion so that they could proselytize non-belief to Canadians, but get the tax benefits to that. And they applied formally to Canada Revenue Agency to be recognized as a religion for the purposes of tax benefits. And they were denied on the basis that you require an element of theistic worship to be considered a religion. The element of theistic worship is broadly interpreted, and there is actually a specific exemption for Buddhism because many strands of Buddhism are non-theistic. Some are, many are not. But there is a specific exemption in CRA regulations for Buddhism. But other than that, you need to have an element of theistic worship. So the flying spaghetti monster, not quite sure if the Church of FSM looks at the flying spaghetti monster as a deity, perhaps. But I don't think anyone has made that application, so there hasn't been a ruling on that, and it is not at present a registered, a recognized religion in Canada.
More of us just simply need to get our colanders out and wear them on our heads.
Perhaps, and so next week there's a dress code, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much for this discussion this week, Leslie. It's been wonderful and informative, and you definitely lit a fire. Did you have any closing remarks before we depart for the week?
I want to thank you all for being here, and just to reiterate that the only way we're going to change things through for the better is with effort. It's not going to happen on its own. The social trends in Canada are in our favor. So more and more people do not identify with the faith or identify increasingly loosely, but institutional inertia is enormous. And the only way we're going to change things, if we're going to change the census question, if we're going to change the Canada Revenue Agency recognizing advancement of religion as a charitable purpose, if we're going to change the $10 billion implicit subsidy of religious education for the separate school system in Ontario, it's only going to happen if people like us and many more people like us take action and organize and agitate and put the effort in to make a difference. So please support Toronto Oasis, become a member of the Centre for Inquiry Canada or any other similar organization. Volunteer, find a cause, do what you can. You have knowledge, you have skills, you have abilities. Help where you can. I mean, you've also got jobs, you've got families, you have commitments. This isn't something that you can dedicate your whole life to. I don't dedicate my whole life to this, but I do what I can when I can, and we do make a difference. The Centre for Inquiry Canada a few years ago lobbied the federal government in cooperation with the Canadian Secular Alliance and Humanist Canada, and we said, you're reviewing the criminal code. While you're doing that, please repeal Canada's blasphemy law. And they did. It took years. It was like 2 years, 2.5 years after that meeting, but it happened. So change is possible. It requires a lot of effort. It requires patience and time, but it happens. But it only happens because people make it happen. And so if you care, please join and contribute what you can, money, time, expertise, whatever it is that you have. And together we'll make a difference, and we will make life in Canada better for everybody as a result. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leslie. And thank you everybody for being here this week. And we will see you next week. Have a wonderful time between now and then.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you all.
John and Kim, for emceeing. Yay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, everyone.